start the recording, if I may, because lots of people who can't join will check up on the recording later. So, Kimmo, thank you very much, and welcome to this session today. We have a large number of deployments either in existence or in progress. We're looking at not just national deployments, but multinational deployments. And we're increasingly reaching out to how we interconnect with other payment schemes, not just via proprietary links. We're looking at things like we're looking at partnerships, for example, in the settlement space, so interconnecting with settlement schemes, and also on other instant payment schemes. And we're also doing a lot of work at the moment on ISO 222 connectivity with other non-Mojo schemes and with banks as well. So we're very keen to see how we can mitigate the risks there, and in particular fraud and obviously anti-money laundering. And we have approaches which are suitable for individual schemes, but nothing that's appropriate across multiple schemes. And we're very keen to hear what you have to say. So, Kimmo, perhaps you could introduce yourself, and we can take it from there.
Very good. Thanks, Paul, and great to be here today. So my name is Kimmo Soramäki. I'm the founder and CEO of FNA. FNA stands for Financial Network Analytics. So we're interested in the financial networks and graph AI. So we're a technology company. We provide software for central banks, mostly, payment systems and banks. My personal background is at central banks. I started at the Bank of Finland 27 years ago, and built actually a payment system simulator there. That sort of took me on this path of payments and technology, which I'm still on. I worked at the European Central Bank, at the New York Fed, at the Bank of England, and then a couple of other central banks, smaller periods of time. Before then, I was always in payments policy research or oversight. And before then, setting up FNA about 10 years ago to provide technology initially for central banks, mostly to get insights about payments. So everything we do is around payments. The original was to get more insights from payments to evaluate the financial stability aspects, systemic risks, stability of individual institutions, their liquidity and solvency positions if they are large value payment systems, and then moved on from there to digital twins of payment systems. We have digital twins of the UK CHAPS, for example, or here I'm in Canada today of the Lynx, a large value payment system here, and then to optimize liquidity in them, and then also to optimize how banks can individually optimize liquidity towards how they interact with these systems by resequencing the payments correctly. But I think today we are talking about fraud and scams and what we can do on the national level. So I'll start sharing my screen. Okay. So the title is Countering Consumer Fraud and Scams with National Fraud Portals. It's a bit misleading because it's also got an international aspect, but I sort of always feel that we need to solve the national problem first, and then we can connect these national fraud portals together for added value for the international aspect. The focus here is on consumers and on fraud and especially scams, and I differentiate the words fraud and scams. So scams is what is sometimes called app fraud, so authorized push payment fraud. So you make the payment yourself, and fraud is unauthorized fraud, which is also a bad word, which means that you didn't authorize the payment, but someone hacked into your account or somehow got that payment made from your account. The focus here is on account-to-account payments because they are the new one, and not so much on cards. So I think we can mostly skip this. Our clients are central banks, payment system operators, and large banks around the world, and also here in North America, the U.S. Department of Defense, mostly also around the proposition that we have around this consumer fraud started from the US DoD work. There we've started building systems to follow the money to catch the bad guy, mostly around weapons, drug trafficking, understanding like how we can use the financial flows to find out who the perpetrators are. And then we took that recently together with PayNet. So PayNet is our first production client in this national fraud portal space, and a lot of the terminology and how I present it is actually based on how we build it together with PayNet over the last couple of years. So what happened I could tell here what happened in Malaysia was that a few years ago, the scams had become massive already, mostly as a consequence of actually I have a slide here. Mostly as a consequence of three factors. The first one was the introduction of instant payment systems. A lot of countries in Southeast Asia had introduced instant payment systems, of course, great, especially during COVID. Many also for the purposes of financial inclusion. So now there was this way for criminals to get their hands on monies immediately by scams, and then onward mule it in the instant payment system many times over during the day before then taking it out in cash or in crypto. And because of this financial inclusion, there was a large group of less sort of financially literate people that could fall into these scams, but also then a large group of people that would be fallen into being victims of providing mule accounts to the criminals. And more recently, of course, like ChatGPT and all the generative AI is very good at creating things that look real. And the primary use case for things that look real but necessarily aren't is, of course, scams. So the AI has been a massive boost for the criminals in the last year. For example, like I'm from Finland. Finland was relatively protected from these scams and international criminal organizations until half a year ago because of the language. We would always notice that, okay, so something off, like, and with these emails that you would receive or text messages, or like if they would set up fake websites. But now, absolutely no difference. The criminals speak exactly like a Finnish bank would speak to you. So the scams have also now, especially in the Nordics, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, it's become a massive problem recently because that's the part of Europe that has had also instant payment systems. So three sort of drivers for this. It's a massive problem globally. So currently at the back of the deployment, and we went into production with Malaysia in April. Sort of nationwide production. We had a pilot starting last September, but I've been speaking since last September with around 38 countries in the world, and I've only found one country where it wasn't a problem yet, but everywhere else, scams is a massive problem, and I think GASA, the Global Anti-Scam Alliance, the number of over 1 trillion is from some of their surveys. The problem with these scams is also that people don't report them because they don't believe that there's nothing that it helps them with, or like they might be ashamed that they fell victim to scams. So these scams are massively underreported everywhere. So these statistics, you really have to survey people and ask like how much have been scammed lately. The current ways of collecting statistics from banks around fraud, for example, so reported fraud to banks, is not sufficient or is not correct because people will not call their banks because they don't believe that they will get their money back. And if they call their banks, the banks might say that, well, did you make the payment yourself? Well, then it's your problem and not counted into any statistics. So that would then, of course, make people not report these scams. Okay, so of course the current approach is where if you talk to many central banks, let's say in Europe, for example, in Central Europe, they would say that the fraud is the responsibility of the banks and would leave it there. But of course, the problem is that banks have very difficulties tackling this new type of scams, especially alone, because they don't see where the payment is going, so they don't know anything about the recipient. They cannot track these fraudulent payments across the banking system because they don't have these systems to see sort of where does the money go from the fraudster to the first mule account, the second mule account, and so forth. And even if they do have these systems, they are very slow. So, for example, in Malaysia, so the prime minister took this as an initiative a couple of years ago and said to the central bank that go and build something for this to tackle scams. The central bank set up a national scam response center. So it's a 997 number where people can call and report the scams. And unlike if you call the bank would say, well, this is your problem. The operators at the National Scam Response Center would say that, let me try to get your money back. And then they would start calling the other banks. So where did the money go? Where did the money go? Where did the money go? So, and to try to recover. And then they would find the bank where there's still some money on the account and say, go and freeze that money. And then over the next year, the victim would, through court processes, get maybe their money back. But at least the money would be frozen and not available to the criminals anymore. This was a very slow process, of course, because it's manual. So the central bank told the payment system operator, Paynet, can you go and build technology to automate this and also to move to more preventive measures, to develop scores for banks based on this cross-industry, cross-rail data to inform them about fraudulent transactions so that they can not make them, or inform the sender, the consumer, that, hey, this looks like a suspicious payment. Are you sure you want to make it? And that's sort of where we came in to work with Paynet to build these money trails in the first place. So that's the cross-bank system to track funds. I think it was the Paynet one was the first national cross-rail, cross-bank, real-time tracking system of the funds. And I think they've been quite successful at it. They had some 30% recovery rates now, or not recovery rate, but earmarking rates for the reported fraud. So in 30% of the monies, they could actually freeze that the people reported as stolen. That compares to the 0.5% that they were able to do before they set up this National Scam Response Center. And as a consequence of the success, people now believe that they can actually get their money back, or at least there's a chance of getting their money back. So the reported fraud has gone up massively in the last months because people call the National Scam Response Center and report the scams, which they didn't do before. And of course, that I think is very good for the economy because it creates this confidence that, hey, like even if I get scammed, there is some recourse to opportunity to get the money back, because sometimes these scams also are the whole life savings of the people, so they can get very serious. So there's also liability issues. I think that most countries, the liability rests with the consumers. UK is making now in October a very drastic change that it's the bank's responsibility to prove that the user was at fault. Otherwise, they have to give the consumer the money back in 30 days time latest if they cannot prove that the consumer was at fault. Same thing in the US. The courts are now siding with the consumers, so the banks are feeling that the liability is being shifted towards the banks. It's not very good because the bank's response will be that they will slow down payments because now we need to do additional checks because we are liable, and then we lose that instant payments. So I think it's much better to solve the problem rather than just make this easy like liability shifts. People's expectations differ wildly from the reality. I think people expect that if they get scammed, they would get their money back. If they shop at a fake website, e-commerce scams are quite big in Asia. Investment scams are big in, let's say, the Western world, to crypto schemes. And so people expect that, like if I make an error, someone will be able to help me with that. But that's not mostly the case now. So when you talk about national fraud portals, we could also say industry fraud portals if we were just interested in tracking funds and scoring payments based on payments data that is shared between banks and incident data. I think the vision here is a little bit broader because there are lots of institutions and authorities that are interested in the same problem and can be helped by the National Fraud Portal. So the first one, of course, is financial institutions, and we talked about those. But the second important is the law enforcement, because at the end, in order to get the money back, the law enforcement needs to build a case, go through the courts, and the courts will decide. And then this is the case in most, at least probably all countries, that you just cannot return the funds, like to the, you need to have a court order for that. Where this is sort of more advanced, the National Fraud Portal is actually providing standardized templates of how these cases should look like, so that the prosecutors know them, the judges know them, the law enforcement can quickly put them through the process of the legal system. The money trails, for example, that there's an immutable version of it so that it can be used in those court cases. So there's quite a lot of interfaces to law enforcement. Law enforcement also wants to know quicker what kind of new schemes are being done, and having the real-time pulse from the payment system. I think it's quite important to identify these new schemes so that they can educate the consumers about these new schemes. And also go after the criminals. So I think having knowledge about these mule networks is very important to go after the criminals, and also for the financial intelligence units, because mule networks are used not only for consumer fraud, they're also used for other types of money laundering. So there's a lot of tie-ins into the AML world, the money laundering world, and the financial intelligence units. Central banks and supervisors, I think, because this is in many countries also an issue about safety and efficiency of payment systems, and supervisors are getting much more involved in the fraud in many countries. Now here in Canada, for example, the supervisor, there's a new real-time rail coming up in 2016. It's called RTR, real-time rail, in 2026. And the supervisor set up a requirement that the new real-time rail needs to have a centralized or a fraud system from day one of operations. So they cannot do like most other countries did, is build an instant payment system and then thinking about fraud a couple of years later. No, the fraud system needs to be in place on day one of operations. And that's why I'm here in Canada, spending quite a bit of time now. FMIs, I think the payment systems are key players here. They weren't in the past the operators involved in a lot of fraud, but because the payment systems aggregate a lot of this data, the cross-bank data, and maybe running several rails together, I think in most countries where I've been speaking about this national fraud portal concept, it would be placed at the payment system, like PayNet in Malaysia, and here it would be Payments Canada who is tasked to be responsible for it. And at the end, it's the consumers that benefit: recover stolen funds, protection from scam fraud, maintain confidence in payments and digital commerce. So what kind of components are there in these national fraud portals then? So we've divided this into pre-settlement. So before the payment is submitted for settlement by the banker, they can get scores from the National Fraud Portal for the transaction, and also maybe for the recipient account, or just generally accounts that they are banking with, to identify mule accounts through different machine learning models. So these are more machine learning models to score transactions or accounts. And then we have post-settlement components, like the reporting ones to the law enforcement, FIUs, others. But also you need a case management system, and then you need this system to track and trace funds. So those are the post-settlement components that we are offering. Actually, in Malaysia, they built the case management system by themselves. But then we provided the tracking and tracing, but we are also building our own case management system at the moment. Criminal investigation, related parties analysis. So I had a conversation yesterday that, hey, it was a consortium of banks that run a technology company for themselves, that they would like to provide the banks tools to make faster investigations. So when you identify a mule account, for example, or a model gives you a mule account, hey, this is a high score. What you need to do is you need to go and investigate it. So having this automated related parties analysis to understand who is that person, what kind of other databases we can find that person in. If it's a company, who are the directors? What other companies is this director of? Has those companies been, involved in some schemes, or directors have been disqualified? To understand the vicinity of who is that account holder, and what data that we can find from it in a related parties network. And then, of course, the different tools to quite often there are lots of, so we have in Malaysia, we have 200 users at the moment, but I think it will go up to 1,000. They're all from the banks. Some banks would have maybe dozens of different case officers, so that the right cases go to the right case officers, so that the connected cases go to the same officer is, of course, more efficient. So these are more around building more efficiencies around the investigation. And then, of course, you need the data management, the mule databases, where do you store the transaction data? These can get very large data sets, and building real-time applications is more like a challenge from a product design perspective. Any questions at this point of time? Feel free actually to jump in if you have some, or maybe there's some in the chat.
Yeah, I just a quick question.
Sorry, James, go ahead.
Just on your previous slide, where you say graph AI based transaction scoring. So I'm aware of several different meanings of the term graph AI. Would you mind saying what you mean specifically there?
So we mean that, actually I have a slide there later. These actually don't have to be neural networks. They can be also something else. But the idea is that we build this graph. So each node here is an account, and its link is a payment that has been made in the past. And then we use this information in addition to any other information that we might have as inputs into the machine learning models.
Oh, understood. Thank you.
Or then using graph neural networks, or combination of these, or some propagation systems to propagate sort of features that are my neighbors or my neighbor's neighbors features into that but it's the idea is that we create more features from the graph aspect, and we actually found that when we build models based on, let's say, behavioral features. So behavioral features would be like, how did this account send and receive payments in the past? How many in the last month? Did it send payments immediately when it received payments, sort of like onward muling type of transactions? So if we just use those versus then adding these graph features, so the models got up to 80% better with the graph features included in the models. And I think it's especially in environments where you have very little data, which might be the payment system. So we actually used only timestamp, hash of sending account, hash of receiving account, and value as inputs into the models. And then we created this large amount of features using these graphs and different sort of statistics around the behavior of the account in the past. But this doesn't include any PII data, which is valuable. So you can get quite good models without having large amount of information if you use these graph features and use the information of the network there in those models.
Thank you. That's very clear. Thanks.
Yeah, very good.
Sorry to jump ahead.
No worries. I think it's perfect. It's gets boring if just one person speaks. So what we're building now is an NFP as a service. So what we would like to offer is a turnkey solution running on the cloud. Maybe countries would not opt into this one here, but I think it would be a good starting point to start thinking about and testing the concept, and then also testing connecting these NFPs together, where it has everything available on the cloud. like it has the case management, the money trails, the investigative tools, and so forth. So that's what we are building at the moment. And then working with actual countries, their on-premise installations and plugging into their systems. But we would like to have one of these running by ourselves probably sometime next year. Okay, so maybe I go through the post-settlement process and I do a little demo as well. So the post-settlement, we started with the post-settlement solutions. When I talk with these 38 countries, everyone wants to build the score first. Hey, we would like to give the banks a score so that they can decide if they want to put the payment through or not. And I say, like, I don't know, the score will probably not be very good because you will not have good incident data, not good mule data, not good payments data yet available because you didn't do any of these post-settlement components to put that data somewhere and like build that labeled database for these machine learning models. So the post-settlement is geared towards identifying mule accounts and from existing incidents, and then for actually earmarking the funds to be able to return them back to the victim. So it starts from an incident report. Then it goes into, so in Malaysia, for example, the incident report actually can be done to the bank or to the National Fraud Portal or the National Scam Response Center. If they do it to the bank will actually inform the National Scam Response Center. So it's centralized, the incident reporting for scams. Then they would do some validation. Okay, is this actually a real person? Do they have an account at the bank that they claim to have? Was this transaction made? Is this a dispute instead of a scam? Is this maybe a fraudster who is trying to flood the system? So you have to do this validation pretty quick. And then after that, prioritization of the case, is the large amount, has it been reported recently? If that's the case, it would have a higher priority. But actually, we're also building sort of like scores for this validation and prioritization based on the data that is generated by the National Fraud Portal to prioritize cases where we have a higher chance of recovering funds and validating cases faster through these different scores that we can provide. And then you go into this funds, not actually recovery, but the earmarking of it, and then the eventual recovery through the courts. And then you have mule and criminal investigations. So banks go and investigate all these mule accounts that have been identified on these trails. So what we're building is fraud incident reporting. So in the UK, in Malaysia, this is the National Scam Response Center. In the UK, it's I think Action Fraud. So there's a centralized reporting place to report scams. Then you have the case validation and prioritization components. So this, but currently in Malaysia, built by Malaysia, we're building our own. This is work in progress for us. And then we have the funds recovery through the money trails. And I could actually show it here. Do you see a new screen or the old screen? Do you see a money trail picture or?
We see a money trail picture.
Oh, yeah. But that might be the slide. Do you see a slide or a software?
No, it's a portal.
It's a software. Like
yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so I can't see what I'm showing. So this is how it sort of looks like. So here is each node here is an account. The color is the bank. So we see that onward muling is always cross bank because the fraudsters know in Malaysia that the banks have in-house systems to track funds for the transfers between their own account holders, but there wasn't a system to track it cross bank. So the incident here is the pink bank. It make $1,000. There's $1,000 transaction to the yellow bank, and then we see that the mule account here moves actually $999 to this blue bank, then $1,001 to the back to pink bank, and then they split it into 500. So sort of like these are actual, this is not made up example. These are actual cases. We just changed the banks and the accounts, but you see that very quickly actually they move onward mule it to different accounts and try to disguise it by just not using exactly the same value for the payment. But then, you know, like if this is the time that this gets reported, we could go and see that, hey, there's probably 500 at this account and 503 at this account that we could earmark. We could try to do it here, but maybe there isn't any balance left, because if they operate very sort of like tightly, you know, like they wouldn't leave money like in maybe there's just $1. No, actually there's -$1, so maybe there was a little bit account. We don't get the balances in the system at the moment. So that's for the banks. They will use this picture to look at. So if you're a blue bank, you would go and see, so maybe I can earmark something here, go to their own systems and earmark then up to this 1,000 or 999. If there would be some balance left. If there isn't balance left, then we would try to get it from here, here, here. So this is how they sort of coordinate very quickly in real time, the banks, how this earmarking happens. And then once the case is closed very quickly, so now I think they close these cases in a matter of tens of minutes, instead of 3 weeks was the original time when the banks had the bilateral system. Then it goes into investigations. So probably all of these are mule accounts. Maybe this one not here, but maybe these are mule accounts here. And then they will be put into a mule database. And the mule database access would be shared to the banks. So the banks can decide whether they want to put payments through to non-mules. And at the same time, we would be collecting a labeled data around how do mules look like. So we could do better models, machine learning models to identify mules that haven't been identified yet.
So
However,
can I ask him, these transactions that you're illustrating here, they've been isolated from essentially a huge amount of other transactions.
Yeah.
Are these within a certain time scale of each?
Yes, exactly. So actually, this is I think these are 3-hour intervals here in this picture. So this is within 3 hours of the incident. This is how the money trail looks like. And all these transactions are sort of like sequentially that after this payment has been made, what payments went out from this account?
Hidden amongst other transactions as well.
Yeah. And then like, okay, this went out from after this. And so after this blue bank received this transaction, what payments went out from it? And then this transaction went out.
So when I've looked at this in the past, using a manual process, not this tool, we were finding that the chain of transactions such as this were all happening within 10 minutes.
Yeah, now they do. In Malaysia, they didn't. They happened in hours before. But now, once they put this real-time system in place, one reaction by the criminals was that they happen in tens of minutes now. So but they were lazy because there wasn't a real-time tracking system available across bank. So the criminals didn't need to be very fast.
Yes. So if I was looking at this, I would have said that 612 transaction is unrelated to this.
Could be, or it could also be. It's maybe unrelated to this case, but it might be maybe related to another case that wasn't reported. Yeah.
Okay. Fine. Sorry, it's just having had the experience of trying to track these transactions. I'm very interested in this tool.
So but like if you go like I don't know 24 hours ahead,
yes,
you start to see these. Like they get very
that's a powerful tool to do that.
So what we're now working on, or we've actually developed the models already to score mules on this network so that we can filter things out. So like we can say that like I probably don't have maybe there's a risk score here. So you could like sort of filter things out, saying that okay, just show me the most risky banks in this network. Or there is a risky accounts. And then you would say that, hey, let's go and investigate these. And then like these are the most likely mules. Actually, they see that there's sort of like, hey, risky account. And then add them to the mule database because we cannot investigate possibly. We have so many trails involved, so many accounts. So we cannot investigate. So we need to prioritize it again for the investigation. Which accounts do we want to go and investigate first? So that's the it's relatively straightforward, but I think the challenge there is that it's a real-time environment and everything needs to happen faster. And this is actually a demo version. The version that Paynet uses, they have the ability to add manually transactions from their own us payments here, and then they have ability to right-click and say like, hey, freeze this amount here, so that it ties them to their in-house systems if they're integrated already. But I think our approach in Malaysia, or their approach, has been to build something very fast and then iterate on it. So get something working very fast and then iterate on it, build new features, new automations. The on-us transactions, for example, are currently not fed into the central database, but that's on the roadmap because that requires integrations from the banks. But having just this shared view of the money trails, I think it's already very valuable for them and accelerates the investigations of the cases. All right.
Sorry, it's not just individual cases though, is it? Because you can see chains of people who are carrying out this type of fraud repeatedly on that graph.
Exactly. Yeah. So then then we also we do this. We can combine these. I don't have an example of that. These money trails together to identify like, hey, which accounts are in most money trails. So they are probably also like likely to be mules. So let's start investigating those and putting them in the database first, and then you can start understanding like how they are connected. Like are they the one criminal organization? Or are there two different criminal organizations using different like mule accounts? So I think there's quite a lot of like opportunities at the back of this sort of intelligence gathering from these money trails, because everything reveals. Like here also in this picture, you see that what are these large transactions here? Like is this a lead? Because the same mule accounts are used for other types of schemes as well. Are these leads to like other schemes? But lots of different workflows that you can start from these in addition to the earmarking of the funds.
Yeah, thank you.
So this is the fourth one, criminal and mule investigations. The ability to tie in other data sets to be able to understand. So here we were just looking at the accounts, but who is behind these accounts? So the use case we actually have in the US DoD, it's a 70 terabyte database that combines together crypto transaction data, beneficial owner data, corporate records about directors, some Bank Secrecy Act reporting by banks, and lots of different databases. The software we have there is the ability to create subgraphs from that around suspicious activity to help direct investigations in the right places. So that's one component that we'll also add to this national fraud portals, or are working on it. Okay, so those were the post-settlement ones. So when you have an incident, you get a lot of intelligence, and currently mostly this intelligence is not used anywhere, because also there are a lot of laws that prevent data sharing. So I was just talking last week with Australia. They still have a tipping law from the 70s. So it says that whenever you do a suspicious activity report or SMR, suspicious matter report in Australia, you're not allowed to tell anyone about it, not even the receiving bank. So they need to go and change that law. In Canada here, they changed the law just a couple of months ago that banks can share information related to fraud incidents. In Malaysia, they had this law maybe a couple of years ago, and it says that the banks can share information if there is a suspicion of fraud and fraud ongoing, or there has been fraud in the past. So it's relatively broad that allows the banks to share the data. So those type of legislations just needs to go through. In Philippines, I was there maybe a month ago. They said that it's in the upper house still. Different countries at different stages of this allowing banks to share data. Okay, so then maybe before we wrap up, something about the pre-settlement components. So there are maybe two main ones here. The first one is the providing the banks a score in real time I think usually people would be thinking that this score is delivered together with the verification of payee. So when the user types in the payment instruction, they would then the bank would get the verification of payee information to show the user that, hey, it goes to the right person and not a fraudster. It's also a fraud actually mitigating thing. And at the same time, the bank would get a score like saying like 0.8. And then the bank would decide whether they want to ask the consumer more questions. Like when I do a Wise payment, they sometimes already ask me that, do you know the recipient in person? Is the recipient exercising time pressure on you to make this payment in order to sort of like have the consumer think a little bit twice whether this might be a scam? And also, I think, push the liability more towards the consumer. But it doesn't have to be the score alone. It could also be, and this is the conversation we have in most sort of like a where you have banks with a lot of resources. The banks would like to get all the features that you can calculate on the central level, the graph features, the behavioral features, everything that you can calculate on the central level. The banks would like to get those so that they can bake them into their own models. So the banks have own fraud systems, and those would be very additive as features into their own systems. And this would be delivered by this like a fraud score API. I think the idea that we have is that the financial institutions still remain responsible. They just have, this is a tool for them to get access to information that they today cannot have because they only have access to their own data. I think I sort of explained this already. So the financial institution receives the payment instruction from the consumer. They query the NFP for the scores. The NFP returns the scores and features of data. FI decides whether to do with the payment. If they submit the payment, then we can track that. Given this information received by the bank, they made this decision. And then we can actually bake it as part of the models as well, that learn from collectively. Banks can learn collectively from each other, and what kind of actions they're taking, or then we can benchmark them and share that information. So I think covered these graph neural networks already. But I think the last thing I want to do, and then maybe if there are still questions, is this different scores that we are working on or have built already. And I think there are 10 of them altogether. So there's this case validity score. I think in Thailand, for example, they said that they have a equivalent of a national scam response center. I think it's called Anti-Fraud Center or something like that, run by ITMX, the payment system operator or the technology company. They have a problem that they get a lot of disputes there and things that are not actually fraud. So they get flooded with and would need technology to identify which ones are valid cases and which ones aren't. The case prioritization score to work on cases that have a higher chance of success. Case allocation. So when officers work on related cases, they're going to be more efficient than working on unrelated cases. Mule account score, the account filtering in the money trails. So when we get all these large money trails, how can we focus on the right accounts to investigate? And then we have identifying ex post, so post settlement, identifying fraudulent transactions that were not reported. Maybe we can go back to the consumer. Actually, if this happens very quickly, we can actually, like credit card companies do, they can call the consumer and say, hey, there was a suspicious transaction from your account. Did you do that? Can you go and check it? Or identify mule accounts in advance before there is an incident and say to banks that, hey, based on all the data analysis, this account looks like a mule. Can you go and investigate it? And then also identifying victims that doesn't necessarily be a certain transaction, but there could be a pattern of transactions in the past that looks like, hey, maybe this person was scammed several times because, of course, fraudsters, it's not necessarily one incident of the scam, but there can be multiple. There was actually a a fake national scam response center in Malaysia. That like people would call to the fake center and then they would report like, hey, I was scammed, and then they would ask all account details and then they would empty their accounts too. And I think the same thing happened in Australia. So there can be, these victims can be victims many times. And then there's the post-settlement fraud detection to get different scores for transactions, accounts, to provide behavioral features back to the banks, to provide graph features back to the banks. And I think the way I think most sort of like, let's say, UK, Australia, Canada are currently thinking this is that the central utility would be a platform where lots of different vendors would come together and provide scores that banks could subscribe into. So there would be a competitive environment for these scores and features. Kind of how, like FNA, we're thinking about it, that we are specialized in graph features. So we could provide graph features to also these other companies providing scores to the banks. So it's not a monopolistic situation where there's a score that is provided to the banks, but it could be more like a platform where different vendors with access to different data sets and access to different approaches and different modeling approaches can provide different types of data scores, features to the banks, and the banks can subscribe to the ones that they find useful. And that's the UK Finance. I know Pay.UK did a pilot with 3 vendors, sort of with that idea in mind recently. All right. Maybe I don't cover the data management components. It's mostly that, yeah, you need to have a database. You need to be able to securely store data, large amounts of transactions. In Malaysia, we have now, I think, 12 million transactions a day. In Thailand, they have 70 million a day. So this can get very large data volumes. Here's a minimal. Quite often people ask what are the minimal data requirements to get started with any of these components, and I say it's really those individual payment transactions, timestamp, sending account, receiving account, can be hashed, value, and we can build all the models from that, and we can also build the money trails from that. Then we need the fraud activity labels to train the models, whether something is a mule, whether a payment was an incident, and the more of that there is available, the better the models become. And that's quite often that it's good to start from the post-settlement components to gather all that data before then being able to do accurate models.
Kimmo, bearing in mind that you said you needed... Oh, right, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned you needed to leave in 5 minutes' time. So if we can ask some questions, if possible. Reiko, you've been making some comments on the chat. Would you like to vocalize those questions direct to Kimmo?
Okay.
No?
The GASA is not the global standard setting body. That's true. It's, I think, an association.
Riker's losing her voice. She can't talk.
Fair enough. Justus, perhaps you'd like to step in.
Maybe just an observation from our side. The underreported fraud is a massive issue because it makes it so difficult to calibrate your models properly. You're trying to catch behaviors that haven't been identified. And the only way to properly calibrate your modeling is to have an accurate view of fraud in the ecosystem in the first place. And the fact that people don't report that fraud is such a big problem for fraud systems and fraud detection. So this is fantastic to see, just that having additional transparency over where the money is going, and then being able to use that as a mechanism to identify, firstly, other known instances of fraud, because somebody who is defrauding one person is most likely also defrauding other people. So it widens that perspective, but then also allows people to be motivated to recover the money because there's a recourse for them. And I think that is terribly encouraging. That's wonderful.
Yeah, you're actually absolutely right also about the difficulty building these models, because like you only have partial data. So then you can also, the problem is that you cannot evaluate whether the results of a model are correct, because in the training set, in the test data set, you also have only 10% of the cases. So what if your model is 100% accurate? It will still only show in the test data set that it's 10% accurate, because you wouldn't have the 90% of the cases that were actually true in the test set. So what we did is like we did like a 3-step process with Malaysia. So we trained the models first with one data set, then we tested it with another data set, and then they went into future blind test, sort of looking at after a couple of months' time, did we find out how much of those false positives were actually true positives, because we found out that after the investigations were done, that they were actually, you know, like, and the model accuracy actually got much better after that. So it showed that a lot of the false positives in the model were actually true cases, but just not yet found out.
That's amazing. That's very encouraging. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Justice. Is there anyone else who'd like to ask a question at this point? Anyone?
If you have any questions later, so the emails are there, so feel free to get in touch with myself or the others.
Okay. Can I ask a question myself, Kimmo, in the absence
Sure.
of anyone else volunteering? Are you integrating with other fraud management systems as well? Or do you view FNA as standalone, effectively?
No, I think so. We have a conversation with Tazama and a lot of the other sort of like fraud systems as well. I think one thing I mentioned already is providing features of data, you know, like, but also sharing a lot of the information. I think it's an ecosystem that needs to emerge, and I think we are focused on the central level, and quite a lot of the other fraud systems are focused on maybe single rail or single institution, but I think these systems can work together very well and augment each other.
Yeah, well, good. I'm glad to hear that, Kimmo. Recognizing your time restriction, I think we should probably call it to a stop there. So I'd like to thank you, Kimmo. That's been a hugely interesting and enlightening session. And I hope that we'll be able to keep in touch, and that the deployment of Mojo will be able to reach out to you on and seek some form of integration with a broader FNA network. So thank you for that. Yep.
Thank you.
That is great. Thank you. It's really helpful and a good
Thank
session.
you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Kimmo.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Nice.